Hello and welcome to week 3. Fantastic work. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of things that I thought were applicable to the whole team. Or I guess you're not a team, but you're a class. So, anyway, that you all might benefit from. You looked at what data models are, and you got started understanding how a data model like Twitter is. How do you find things in it? And why are those other fields that people tend to ignore useful? So I think this turned out really well, and I think it got you started really quickly in understanding how all these extra fields help give context to maybe the main piece of data. And we are definitely going to start to work on what is the main piece of data. So that's what I looked for when you shared this, your data sets, is what is the topic? And to be successful in the IA techniques that we're going to use, we're going to need a topic that's pretty vast, meaning there's going to be a lot of examples. And so many of you might have shared some data set that I felt was kind of finite. So, for example, if a I can only think of anything that you could just write down yourself and you could organize yourself isn't necessarily going to benefit from the kind of exploration we're going to do, where you will find it overwhelming to try to do everything by hand. So that means a topic that is, again, pretty vast. Now, in your table, you don't have to have every example of every piece of data. So this week, we're actually going to fix up and modify and try and understand our data. So we're going to get into patterns. But let me just show you an example or two. Thank you. By the way, Airtable makes a lot of this a lot easier. I hope you're appreciating this is an amazing tool to deal with data. And even though it looks like Excel, it is not Excel. I'll get into that a little bit more. By the way, there's also going to be a sync session because I just want to make sure that anyone who has questions, I can help out with this assignment, which is due at the end of the week. So there's a great thing that it does, by the way, is to see and begin grouping, which is a big topic for this week. In this case, Netflix shows. It's a pretty vast amount of content. I guess I could say you could extend it to be every television show or movie or something like that. That's fine too. The vastness just gives you a little bit more context of what fields you might need to organize such vastness. So this one has a lot of great examples, right? Director, country, date added is probably not relevant. You can just, by the way, you can just go in and delete this column. That's going to happen this week. Delete stuff that is more relevant to where you got it from rather than you moving forward and organizing it. Release year is great. Rating, by the way, this rating is good, meaning this is a rating that is applied to this row in this example, whatever show this is. But other ratings, such as customer ratings, are called metadata. So we want to delete those. We don't get to metadata until week whatever. Show ID, by the way, is another column you can delete. But as an example, something like a television show, things tend to be good for this class. Things that you could buy, things you could, things, cars, anything, things. Because that's a model that doesn't make doesn't challenge you too much. You could probably think of things that could help describe a thing. An activity or a place can be a little bit more challenging. And so many of you might have data sets that just I said aren't going to work. So I can just rattle off a few that people have done in the past. I think restaurants have always been pretty popular as topics. What else? Let's see. Now I'm blanking. The reason I'm giving this to you all to figure out is that you might surprise me, and many of you do. Sometimes the topics are very I've seen before, which is terrific. Again, there's nothing wrong. The data, in fact, in a sense, won't matter that much moving forward. It's the techniques that you use to organize it that are important. But as I said, if it isn't vast, it will make your life a little bit harder because there just won't be the opportunity to use the techniques that we're going to use. So that's my 2 cents. Let's move on and take a look at week 3. Here we go. Patterns. Okay, so patterns are fun because this is actually the most interesting thing happening in technology today, which is that things that people used to do as jobs, so many of which require them understanding or recognizing patterns, which humans love to do, uh, is actually being taken over by algorithms. And so the real interesting thing here is, okay, you aren't an algorithm, and in fact, algorithms really cannot understand data tables like you have right now. There's just too much context missing for an algorithm to understand something. However, if it sees in a field the same word repeated 2 or 3 times, you just saw that example in Airtable. It goes, oh, I recognize that, and that means I can put a circle around it and I can give it a color, and that helps you recognize a pattern. So it's recognizing patterns for you, but it's doing it the most simplistic level. Hopefully that made sense. So right now, we're going to make sure that your data has some patterns that can be recognized. So patterns could be groupings. That's a great example too. Let's say you had a database that required something like an address. Well, addresses are bad because one point of them is they're unique. There's only one address. So anytime you see unique data where it's literally unique, it has to be, such as, I guess, an email, it might be an example of data that is unique. It's supposed to be unique. There's only one of them. It is hard to group. There's really no way to do it. You could say, well, it's a Gmail address. Well, that is a group, but it's kind of a meaningless group, if you know what I'm saying. So grouping right now is looking for words or symbols, and if you don't have them, you need to invent them. And that'll be fun for this week. Also, we're going to start, our biggest word here is hierarchy, which is what's important to a user, what's important to a human. You know, they're looking here for some reason. Maybe, for example, the most important thing is a title or a description or something, you know, a year. This is just to get you to start looking for these patterns as a human being, or have Airtable recognize them for you, or invent them. And then we're going to have another exercise, which is you're going to probably need to add more fields. At this point, this data is yours. It doesn't matter where it came from or what its provenance was. Much like Netflix, you could extend it to be all movies on all platforms conceptually, and it really wouldn't change the data that much. But you might need a field, and here's a good hint, a field called what streaming service is this on, or how do you get it, or whatever you want to call this field, and the field would say Netflix. So once you've added that field, here's another great example. If you add an address and it said Chicago, Illinois, if you added one more field called country, you could basically make it anywhere in the world. So sometimes you just need to add one more field to make this much more bigger and more universal and able to handle more data. The profundity of this is why the internet can be very profitable. That a company like Uber basically just started in San Francisco and dealt with all the problems of moving people around and all that in San Francisco. But in order to scale, it really wasn't that hard to extend the data to be in more places. Yes, it was hard. I'm glossing over the difficulties, but just in terms of the data model, once you figure it out for a place, it is easier to extend to a vaster group of data. So that's one of the goals of this week. And then lastly, just want to make sure that there's something you can do with your data. Sometimes if it's very personal, like keep track of my record collection, that's a very personal goal. But if it was about all records on Earth, you know, all albums, and then there was just a field saying who owns it, and there's a field, and that field had my name in it, you see what I mean? That's all you'd need to make it a much bigger, more robust database. But you also might need to think, again, is there any goal? Because we will get there eventually that we'll want to build something out of that. So that is week 3. Pardon me for the improvisation, but if you have questions, come to the sync session. Hopefully these are helpful to get you oriented as to the goals. And don't forget, of course, the readings are very important. As always, I'm not going to navigate there, but yeah, that's this week, week 3.